My name is Brooke Sterling, and I'm about to tell you the story of how I destroyed my relationship, lost my job, and learned the hardest lesson of my life in the span of one dinner. It all started when Preston Walsh's iPad came out at his parents' table, and everything I'd been pretending to be crumbled in real time. Looking back now, I can see the cold satisfaction in his eyes as he methodically dismantled every lie I'd built. At the time, I thought I was being clever. Now I understand I was dancing with a predator who knew exactly how this would end before I even opened my mouth. I was 26, dating Brady Walsh for 3 months, and desperately trying to impress his family. The Walshes weren't wealthy, but they were solid middle-class Connecticut people who'd built something real. Brady worked in sales at his father's accounting firm. His parents, Richard Sr. and Patricia, had grown their practice from nothing. And his sister, Anna, had married this construction superintendent named Preston, who seemed to command respect without demanding it. Preston Walsh. Even now, 2 years later, I can picture him sitting across from that dinner table, quietly eating Patricia's famous pot roast, while I systematically tried to tear him apart. He was 34, built like someone who actually worked with his hands, broad shoulders, calloused fingers, the kind of physical presence that comes from years of real labor. But it wasn't his size that made me uncomfortable. It was his calm confidence, the way he occupied space without apology, completely secure in who he was while I was frantically performing someone else. See, I'd told Brady I was an account executive at Consolidated Insurance, senior level, major commercial clients, important meetings in glass-walled conference rooms. The truth was messier and more humiliating. I was a customer service representative level 1, making $35,000 a year, taking calls from people whose fenders got dented in Walmart parking lots. 8 hours a day of, "Thank you for calling Consolidated. This is Brooke. How can I help you?" Followed by explaining deductibles to angry people who thought insurance should cover everything. But Brady's family seemed successful, established, the kind of people who'd never had to worry about making rent or choosing between groceries and gas. I needed them to think I belonged at their table, that their son hadn't settled for some nobody from customer service. The dinner started normally enough. Patricia had outdone herself with the pot roast, Richard Sr. was telling stories about tax season adventures, and Brady was being his usual charming self, making everyone laugh with impressions of difficult clients. Then Preston arrived with Anna, and I immediately felt the temperature in the room shift, not because he was intimidating or demanding attention, but because of how effortlessly he fit. While I was carefully monitoring every word that came out of my mouth, Preston just existed. He complimented Patricia on the meal without being obsequious, listened to Richard's stories without trying to top them, asked Anna about her interior design projects with genuine interest, and treated everyone with this easy respect that made my own performance feel hollow and desperate. That's when I decided to knock him down a few pegs. "So, Preston," I said, cutting into my roast with what I hoped looked like casual interest, "Brady mentioned you work in construction. That must be physical work." He nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "I'm a construction superintendent. We handle commercial projects, some high-end residential developments." Right. So you're like a foreman, managing the crew that does the actual building?" "Something like that," he said quietly, and I caught what I thought was embarrassment in his voice. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. Preston wasn't embarrassed about his job. He was already reading me like a blueprint, already, understanding exactly what kind of person I was, and he was giving me rope to hang myself with. The man who oversaw multi-million-dollar construction projects wasn't intimidated by some customer service rep playing dress-up. He was calculating how much rope I'd need. But I was too insecure and too threatened to notice the danger. "That's fascinating," I continued, my voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "I mean, someone has to do the actual building, right? Not everyone can work in offices dealing with complex client relationships." Anna shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Brady was still eating, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. Patricia and Richard were watching this exchange with growing concern, but I was too committed to my performance to stop. "Anna mentioned you didn't go to college," I pressed on, each word calculated to diminish. "That's so refreshing in today's world. I mean, not everyone needs a degree to find work they're suited for." The table went quiet. Even Brady looked up from his plate, finally sensing something was wrong. But Preston just set down his fork and looked at me directly for the first time all evening, and I should have recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same expression a demolition expert wears when surveying a building marked for destruction. "Where did you go to school, Brooke?" he asked, his voice still calm, but carrying a new edge that made my stomach flutter with unease. "State University," I said proudly, lifting my chin. "Business administration with a marketing focus. 4 years of intensive coursework in client relations, strategic communications, and market analysis. It's been incredibly valuable in my executive career." He nodded slowly, like he was filing away information. "And you work at Consolidated Insurance?" "That's right. I'm an account executive in their commercial division. I handle major corporate clients, complex policy structures, multi-million-dollar coverage. Packages." "Impressive," he said, but something in his tone had changed completely. The polite dinner guest was gone, replaced by something more focused and dangerous. "How long have you been with them?" 8 months, I said, my confidence still intact. "I started as an associate account executive, but I've been promoted quickly because of my performance metrics and client retention rates." Preston reached for his water glass with the deliberate movements of a man who'd made a decision. The ice clinked against the glass, the only sound in a room that had suddenly become too quiet. "You must handle some interesting projects in that role," he said conversationally. "Commercial insurance can be complex. Risk assessment, liability calculations, coverage optimization." I felt a flush of pride. Finally, someone was acknowledging my expertise. "Oh, absolutely. Just last week I closed a major manufacturing client. Complex coverage package, multiple properties, significant. Liability exposure, 6-figure premium." "That's substantial," Preston agreed, setting down his glass with mechanical precision. "Those manufacturing policies require extensive knowledge of OSHA regulations, workers' compensation structures, property valuation methodologies." "Exactly," I said, warming to the subject. "Most people don't understand the intricacies involved. It's not just selling insurance, it's strategic risk management consulting." Preston nodded thoughtfully, then did something that still gives me nightmares when I remember it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his iPad. "You know," he said, his voice carrying that same conversational tone that somehow managed to sound like a judge reading a verdict. "I actually know some people at Consolidated Insurance. We handled their claims adjuster's office renovation project last year. State-of-the-art facility, $2.3 million build-out." My stomach dropped, but I kept smiling. The show had to go on. "Oh, really? Small world." "Yeah, Chuck Morrison was our primary contact there, senior manager in their commercial claims division." Preston was scrolling through his iPad with the focused attention of a surgeon selecting instruments. "We worked closely with him for 6 months. Good guy, very thorough, knows everyone in that company." "I'm sure our paths haven't crossed," I said quickly. "Different departments, you know." "Actually," Preston said, looking up from his screen with eyes that had gone completely cold. "Let me see if Chuck's available. I bet he'd know you, given your position with major commercial clients." "Oh, you don't need to bother him." "No bother at all. Chuck and I text regularly. He's been asking about referrals for other projects." Preston's fingers moved across the screen with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd done this calculation before. "Besides, I'm curious about that manufacturing deal you mentioned. Chuck would appreciate knowing about major new commercial accounts." I watched in growing horror as Preston typed, "Hey Chuck, having dinner with someone who works at Consolidated, Brooke Sterling, account executive handling major commercial clients, says she just closed a 6-figure manufacturing policy. You know her?" The message went through with a soft swoosh that sounded like a cannon firing in the silence. Brady was staring at Preston like he'd just pulled out a loaded weapon. Anna looked confused and concerned. Patricia and Richard had stopped eating entirely, their forks suspended halfway to their mouths. "Preston," Anna said softly, "what are you doing?" "Just networking," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's important to connect people in the same industry." The response came back in less than 90 seconds. I know because I counted every one of them, watching Preston's face as he read Chuck Morrison's reply. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in. The atmosphere, like the moment before a controlled demolition when everything is perfectly still. Preston set the iPad on the table and turned it so everyone could see the screen. The text message was clearly visible. No account executives named Brooke Sterling here. We do have a Brooke Sterling in customer service, though. Level 1, rep, handles individual auto claims. Been here about 8 months. Why? The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was vacuum-like, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Patricia's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Richard's jaw went slack. Brady looked like someone had just told him his house was on fire. But Preston wasn't done. Not even close. With the same methodical precision he probably used to review construction blueprints, he pulled up what looked like a company directory on his iPad. "This is interesting," he said, his voice carrying the flat professionalism of someone reading specifications. "Chuck sent me their organizational chart. Very helpful of him." He turned the screen toward the table again, and I could see a complex flowchart showing different departments and hierarchies. "Customer service is here," he said, pointing to a box at the bottom of the chart. "Entry level, starting salary around $35,000. Their primary responsibilities are handling individual claims, processing payments, explaining deductibles to policyholders." His finger moved up the chart with surgical precision. "Account executives are here, 3 full levels above customer service. They handle corporate clients, develop strategic partnerships, manage multi-million-dollar portfolios. Average salary $85,000 to $120,000, depending on book of business." Brady's face had gone white. "Brooke, what the hell is this?" But Preston still wasn't finished. He was just getting started. "There are 12 distinct positions between where Brooke actually works and where she claims to work," he continued, his voice gaining that cold edge that made me shrink back in my chair. 12 separate promotions, each requiring specific qualifications, performance reviews, and approval processes. He looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made me understand I wasn't dealing with just a construction worker. This was a man who built complex structures from the ground up, who understood systems and hierarchies and exactly how they functioned. "Brooke," he said, and my name sounded like a death sentence in his mouth. "Would you like to explain to Brady's family how someone jumps 12 organizational levels in 8 months without anyone noticing?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely, and I felt like I was drowning in front of everyone I'd wanted to impress. "Or maybe you'd prefer to explain that manufacturing client you mentioned, the 6-figure premium?" Preston's voice carried the methodical tone of someone dismantling a structure piece by piece. "Because Chuck also sent me their new business reports from last week. No major manufacturing policies were written by anyone named Sterling." Brady stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. "Brooke, we need to talk. Outside. Right now." But I couldn't move. I was frozen in my chair, watching this man I'd tried to humiliate systematically destroy everything I'd built about myself with the cold precision of someone who understood exactly how lies were constructed and exactly where to place the charges to bring them down. And the worst part, the part that still makes me wake up in cold sweats, was the look of vindictive satisfaction in Preston's eyes. Not anger, not indignation, pure, calculated satisfaction. He was enjoying this. "The really fascinating part," Preston continued, apparently not finished with his demolition work, "is the psychology behind this kind of fabrication." He leaned back in his chair with the relaxed posture of someone who just completed a successful project. "See, Brooke spent the first hour of this dinner making subtle attacks on my background, my education, my profession. She called me just a construction worker, implied I was lucky to marry into this family, suggested that people like me do work that's suited for those without college degrees." His voice carried that same flat precision, but now there was something darker underneath it. All while lying about every single aspect of her own career. Not just small lies, not innocent exaggerations, complete fabrications about her job title, her responsibilities, her salary, her achievements. Patricia set down her wine glass with shaking hands. "Preston, maybe we should—" "No," he said, and for the first time that night, his voice carried real steel. "I want everyone at this table to understand what just happened here." He turned back to me, and I saw something in his expression that made me understand why men followed his orders on construction sites. You want to know what I actually do, Brooke, since you seem so interested in professional qualifications? I couldn't answer. I could barely breathe. I manage construction projects worth $2 to $15 million each. I coordinate teams of 25 to 40 skilled professionals: electricians, plumbers, crane operators, concrete specialists, each of them experts in their field. I work with structural engineers who design buildings that won't fall down, with architects who create spaces that will serve communities for 50 years, with city planners who understand infrastructure in ways you couldn't comprehend. He paused, letting that information settle. Last month, my crew completed a medical facility that will serve this community's healthcare needs for the next half-century. We brought it in 2 weeks early and $200,000 under budget. The foundation we poured will support that building through hurricanes, earthquakes, and whatever else nature throws at it. His eyes never left mine. And you answer phone calls about fender benders for $35,000 a year. That's when I started crying. Not pretty tears, not dignified sorrow. Ugly, humiliating sobs that shook my whole body and made mascara run down my cheeks in black streams. Because he was right about everything. Every single thing. I had been ashamed of my job. I had been intimidated by his quiet confidence. I had attacked him because I felt small and wanted to make him smaller, and he had methodically, systematically, and with obvious satisfaction, destroyed me for it. The saddest part, Preston continued, his voice now carrying a tone of clinical observation, is that there's nothing inherently wrong with customer service work. It's honest labor helping people when they need assistance. But Brooke was so ashamed of what she actually does that she invented an entirely different career and then felt compelled to attack someone else's honest work to make herself feel superior. Brady's face had gone through several color changes, white to red to purple. How could you lie to me for 3 months? I was going to tell you, I managed to choke out. Bullshit, he said with more venom than I'd ever heard from him. You were never going to tell me. You would have kept lying until we got married, or until someone else called you out exactly like Preston just did. He shook his head, looking at me like I was something he'd stepped in. And the way you went after him tonight, Jesus Christ, Brooke. He never did anything to you except exist in the same room and be successful at his job. I was nervous. You were cruel, Brady said. You were vicious and calculating and cruel. There's a difference between nervous and what you did here tonight. Anna finally spoke up, her voice quiet, but carrying an edge I'd never heard before. Brooke, Preston works 16-hour days building things that matter. He employs people. He creates value. He solves problems. What exactly were you trying to accomplish by tearing him down? I looked around the table at these people I'd wanted so desperately to impress. Richard Sr. looked disgusted. Patricia looked hurt and betrayed. Anna looked disappointed in ways that cut deeper than anger. Brady looked like he was seeing me for the first time and didn't like what he saw. And Preston looked satisfied, coldly, methodically, completely satisfied with the destruction he'd just engineered. Brady drove me home that night in complete silence. 23 minutes of absolute quiet except for the hum of his BMW's engine and the sound of my occasional sniffling. When we pulled into my apartment complex, he finally spoke. How could you lie to me for 3 months? His voice was flat, drained of all the warmth I'd grown used to. I was going to tell you the truth. When? He interrupted. When exactly were you planning to mention that your entire professional identity was fiction? I didn't have an answer because we both knew I never would have told him. The lie had become too comfortable, too essential to how I saw myself. And what you did to Preston tonight? He shook his head. That wasn't nervousness, Brooke. That was character assassination. You tried to humiliate him because you felt threatened by his confidence. I just wanted your family to respect me. By tearing down someone they already respected, by attacking his background, his education, his work. Brady's voice was rising now, all the anger he'd contained at dinner finally breaking free. Do you understand what you did? Preston built that medical facility where my mom had her surgery last year. The man you called just a construction worker literally built the building that saved my mother's life. The weight of that information hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent an evening attacking someone who'd contributed more to Brady's family than I ever could, and I'd done it while lying about my own minimal contributions to anything meaningful. He never talks about his work because he doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, Brady continued. He knows what he's built, what he's accomplished, what he's worth, and you tried to destroy that because it made you feel small. He was right, of course. Preston's quiet confidence had exposed my desperation, and I'd responded with viciousness. The thing that really gets me, Brady said, staring through the windshield at my apartment building, is that you could have just been honest. Customer service is honest work. Nobody at that table would have looked down on you for it. Your family has money. My family has money because they work for it. My dad built his accounting practice from nothing. My mom worked 2 jobs to help him get started. They respect people who work, period. But they can't respect someone who lies about their work and then attacks others for being successful. That night, I lay in bed replaying every moment of that dinner. Every time I remembered Preston's cold satisfaction as he dismantled my lies, every time I pictured the disappointment on the Walsh family's faces, I felt a fresh wave of shame mixed with something else I didn't want to acknowledge. Grudging respect for how completely he'd outmaneuvered me. The man had let me hang myself with my own rope, then methodically cut me down in front of everyone who mattered to me. And he'd done it with the same precision he probably used to plan building demolitions. But the worst part was still coming. Monday morning, I got called into HR before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. "Miss Sterling," my supervisor Janet said, her voice carrying the tone reserved for terminal diagnoses. "We've had some concerning reports about you misrepresenting your position with the company." My stomach dropped. "I don't understand." "We received a call this morning from Chuck Morrison, one of our senior claims managers. He mentioned that someone had been inquiring about you, claiming to be an account executive handling major commercial clients." The room felt like it was spinning. Preston's contact hadn't just verified my job title, he'd reported the entire conversation to company management. Mr. Morrison was confused because, as you know, we don't have any account executives named Brooke Sterling. When he investigated further, he discovered that you've been representing yourself externally as holding a position you don't actually have. I tried to explain, tried to minimize it, tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but Janet held up a hand to stop me. "Miss Sterling, we take fraud very seriously here, even social fraud that doesn't directly impact our operations. Your behavior reflects on our company's reputation and suggests a concerning pattern of dishonesty that we cannot tolerate in any employee, regardless of their level. It wasn't fraud, it was misrepresentation of your employment status, which constitutes a violation of your employment agreement and our code of conduct." She slid a folder across the desk. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately." I sat there staring at the termination papers, understanding that Preston Walsh had just cost me my job from his dinner table. The man had destroyed my relationship and my career with a single text message to someone named Chuck Morrison. And the most infuriating part was that he'd been completely justified in doing it. I spent the next week in my apartment, oscillating between fury and self-pity. How dare he be so vindictive? How dare he cost me my job over dinner conversation? How dare he be so coldly satisfied with ruining my life? But slowly, as the anger faded, something else started to emerge. A strange kind of clarity that I'd been avoiding for months. Preston hadn't ruined my life. I had ruined my life. He'd just refused to let me ruin his reputation in the process. I'd attacked a successful man because his success made me feel inadequate about my own lies. I'd tried to diminish someone who'd actually built something meaningful because I needed everyone to think I was more important than I was. And when he'd defended himself with facts instead of insults, when he'd exposed my lies with methodical precision, I'd called him vindictive rather than acknowledging that I'd started a fight I was never equipped to finish. The man who managed multi-million-dollar construction projects wasn't threatened by a customer service representative. He was just intolerant of being attacked by someone living a complete lie. 3 months later, I got a new job. Customer service again, but this time at a regional insurance company that treated their employees like human beings instead of replaceable parts. The pay was similar, $37,000 to start, but the culture was different. When people asked what I did, I told them the truth. I help people navigate insurance claims when they're having one of the worst days of their year. It's not glamorous work, but it matters to the people I help. And you know what? Most people respected that answer more than they'd ever respected my elaborate lies about being an account executive. But I still thought about Preston Walsh. Not romantically. God knows I'd learned my lesson about reaching above my station. I thought about the cold satisfaction in his eyes as he'd systematically destroyed everything I'd claimed to be. The methodical way he'd exposed each lie. The precision with which he'd calculated exactly how to humiliate me most effectively. It should have made me hate him. Instead, it taught me something I'd never understood about real power. Preston didn't need to brag about managing multi-million-dollar projects or leading teams of skilled professionals. His confidence came from knowing exactly what he'd built and what it was worth. My desperation to impress people came from knowing I hadn't built anything worth respecting. He'd let me attack him because he knew I was attacking from a position of weakness. And when he decided I'd gone too far, he'd crush me with facts instead of insults. That wasn't vindictiveness. That was someone protecting their reputation from a person who'd declared war on it. I never apologized to Preston directly. How do you apologize for trying to tear someone down because your own insecurity made you vicious? What words could possibly address that kind of behavior? But I did start living differently. When my new coworkers talked about their weekend plans, I stopped embellishing my own activities to sound more interesting. When dates asked about my job, I described it honestly instead of upgrading my title. When my family asked how my career was progressing, I told them the truth about my goals instead of pretending I'd already achieved them. It was terrifying at first. Without the elaborate fiction I'd built about myself, I felt exposed and ordinary, but gradually, something unexpected happened. People seemed to respect my honesty more than they had ever respected my lies. About a year after that dinner, I ran into Anna Walsh at a coffee shop. My first instinct was to hide, to duck behind a display case and wait for her to leave. But something made me approach her instead. "Anna," I said, "I owe you an apology." She looked up from her laptop, and I saw wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Brooke, how are you?" "I'm different," I said honestly. "I wanted to apologize for what I did to your husband at your parents' house. It was inexcusable." Anna studied my face for a long moment. "Why did you do it?" It was a fair question, and I'd had a year to think about the answer. Because I was ashamed of who I really was, and attacking someone successful made me feel less small, I said. "It was cowardly and cruel, and I'm sorry." She nodded slowly. Preston never talks about that night. He went back to work the next day like nothing happened. "How is he?" "The same as always, building things, leading his teams, treating people with respect regardless of their job title." She paused. "He's a good man who didn't deserve what you did to him." "I know." Anna closed her laptop and looked at me directly. "The thing is, Brooke, Preston wasn't trying to destroy you that night. He was defending himself against someone who was attacking him unprovoked. If you'd just been honest about your work, if you treated him with basic respect, none of that would have happened." She was right, of course. I'd started a war I was never equipped to win, and then called my opponent cruel for finishing it. "For what it's worth," I said, "losing my job and my relationship taught me something I needed to learn. About honesty, about respect, about the difference between confidence and desperation." "Good," Anna said simply. "Everyone deserves to learn those lessons, even if it takes a hard fall to get there." As I walked away from that coffee shop, I realized that Preston Walsh had given me something valuable that night, even though it hadn't felt like a gift at the time. He'd forced me to confront the gap between who I was and who I was pretending to be. The construction superintendent who managed complex projects and led teams of skilled professionals hadn't been threatened by a customer service representative living a lie. He'd just been unwilling to let me tear him down to build myself up. And in destroying my carefully constructed fiction about myself, he'd freed me to become someone I could actually respect. That dinner cost me a relationship and a job, but it gave me something more valuable, the understanding that real confidence doesn't need to diminish others to shine, and that honest work, whatever it is, has dignity when you own it instead of being ashamed of it. Sometimes the person who exposes your lies with cold precision is doing you the biggest favor of your life, even when it feels like they're destroying everything you've built. Because what they're really destroying is everything you've built on a foundation of deception, and that foundation was never going to hold anyway. The truth has a way of emerging eventually, and it's far less painful when you choose to reveal it yourself than when someone else does it for you with surgical precision at a family dinner table.